Hi, this is Ozzie Ostwalt, and welcome to Religion and Life. The relationship between historic Christianity. Yes. Okay. Hi, this is Ozzie Ostwalt, and welcome to Religion and Life. The relationship between historic Christianity and capitalism has often been debated in our culture. Our guest today, Ralph Lentz, has some interesting ideas about how Christianity and capitalism have developed and influenced each other in American culture. Welcome, Ralph.
Glad to be here, Ozzie.
Tell me a little, you're in our Department of History here at Appalachian. Tell me a little bit about what you teach or what you're interested in these days.
Yeah, so I teach basically classes in ancient world history, modern world history, modern world empires, and one of my major focuses is political theology.
Tell me what that means, political theology, because I think that's where your interest in economics and Christianity come in.
That's right, yeah. So political theology is the study of how politics and religion relate to one another. And I'm interested as a historian in that relationship between religion and politics going all the way back to antiquity and carrying up to our own day.
Okay. So part of what you do when you're looking at this relationship between politics and religion, at least as it applies to Christianity, part of what you've been looking at and thinking about is the relationship between the economic system of capitalism and Christianity. And I think if I'm right here in understanding what you've been saying, is that you believe that capitalism as a system has kind of fundamentally and profoundly changed the character of Christian culture. Is that a fair statement?
It is,
and how would you see that dynamic playing out?
Right. Well, there's been lots of work done on this, and one of the interesting things that other scholars and historians have pointed out is that when the term secular begins to be used in the 1860s in newspapers, where newspapers begin talking about, well, why aren't people going to church like they used to? What they've found is that at the same time that secularization is happening, in other words, people are not as religious, at that very same time, it's the first time in world history where people in the West, particularly in England, and a little later in the United States of America, are becoming economically self-sufficient. In other words, the ancient idea that God provides for your daily bread,
right,
isn't as prominent in life, because the fact is, you can get a job, you can get a good wage-paying job. And I think existentially, it's capitalism and this ability for humans to be able to supply their own economic needs that has more to do with people, quote unquote, losing their faith than the scientific revolution or theories of evolution.
So the greater independence that people can gain economically, and maybe this is related to industrialization in Western society as well, but as people gain independence economically and have a higher standard of living, their psychological need for religion, or even for God, you might say, decreases. Is that essentially from a kind of psychological perspective?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And too, the Bible has a lot to say about greed. Right. The word in Greek is pleonexia, and it literally simply means to want more, but it gets translated as greed. And so one of the interesting things that happens as capitalism becomes more ingrained in society is that what the Bible talks about as being spiritually dangerous, this hungering, this craving for more, which can turn into sin, greed, in capitalism actually becomes a virtue.
Okay, so you got on the one, so the two here, well, you're talking about biblical Christianity and
Yeah.
biblical teachings, biblical theology, fundamentally clashes with the capitalist idea of attaining more through hard work, through
That's right.
labor.
That's right. Yeah. Or not even that, because one of the interesting things, and this is where capitalism really does rival religion and Christianity in particular, because modern capitalism begins with the invention of credit. Mm-hmm. And so credit, of course, comes from the Latin credere, to believe, to trust in, to have faith in. And so when a bank issues credit, it's saying, basically, I trust you to pay back what you actually don't have now.
Right, right.
And so capitalism is a faith system. But because it's based on nothing, because it's based on what people don't have, it constantly has to expand.
Right.
And so wanting more, getting more, buying more, putting things on credit is essential to keeping capitalism going. But that also inculcates what in biblical terms would be considered greed.
So it sounds like what you're suggesting almost is that capitalism has become a secular religion, and in many ways it's replacing kind of historic Christianity. Or at least changing it. So,
changing it dramatically.
So,
yeah.
So do you see, I'm assuming you don't see Christianity vanishing, so does that mean Christianity has itself changed the way it views certain aspects of its theology and ethics and morals in response to capitalism? And maybe we can focus a little bit on American society and culture.
Yes. Capitalism, I think, has remarkably changed Protestant Christianity in America. And I'll give you an example. Okay. And it's really something powerful to think about. The American War for Independence was a rebellion against a Christian kingdom.
Right.
Let that sink in, right? We have the king who is head of the Anglican Church.
Right.
This is a Christian kingdom. And you have...
And I don't think I've ever heard it phrased quite like that. So, yeah, we do need to let that sink in.
Yeah.
Okay.
And what is this rebellion about? It's about economics. Mm-hmm. It's about no taxation without representation. It's about freedom of trade. In the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson puts in that basically King George has limited our ability to expand into new territories. Well, many of the founding fathers, including George Washington, were surveyors, and they were basically in real estate. Right. So it's a profound thing to think about, that you have Christians on both sides of the Atlantic, but Christians here are willing to take arms over essentially economic rights.
And that brings up another kind of interesting dynamic, I think, that's playing out or has played out in American history, and that is this kind of conflation, if you will, of politics, economics, and Christianity, and oftentimes they're seen together. I've got an image here of a book, actually, that plays a very important role, if we can get that up on the screen, in American popular culture, a book by Benjamin Franklin. And I think Poor Richard's Almanac, of course. Yeah. Oftentimes, Franklin is seen as a kind of founding father, and he's often quoted. And sometimes what he has to say sort of blurs the boundaries between religion and politics.
Yeah, I'll play with my students and I'll ask them, so what part of the Bible is this phrase from? God helps those who help themselves, and some will say, well, that's in the New Testament, or generally that's what I get, and I point out, no, that's not the gospel of Jesus, that's the gospel of Ben Franklin, that's the gospel of Poor Richard's Almanac, and that's precisely what historians have looked at. Again, how capitalism gives a sense of self-sufficiency. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the Bible's all about grace. The Bible is all about, if you take the beginning words of Genesis seriously, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, then you have to take seriously the fact that all of existence, including human existence, is based on God. And increasingly, and certainly by the 1700s, you see remarkable popular expressions of, well, no, God helps those who help themselves. In fact, there's an expectation that God expects us to work things out on our own. And so it's a pretty profound change.
It's a profound change. Since you bring that up, maybe we can just sort of outline the difference between a kind of biblical economy, if you would, briefly, as opposed to the kind of American view of a Christian economy in popular culture.
Yeah.
So, how would you contrast the two? Let's say, just pulling from the teachings of Jesus, for example, or the economy of the early church that we read about in the book of Acts. How does that differ from the American ideal?
Yeah. The most central way in which those two economies are different is in the concept of private property. Now, of course, the Bible says, "Thou shalt not steal."
Right.
And so there's a sense that that you have your property and I have my property, and we have a right to that, and that's for our benefit. But that's also to benefit the poor and to help the community. There's no, in other words, going back to Genesis, there's no sense in which, though, that any human being can completely own anything. And so even land, if you look at how God gives the land to Israel and He apportions the tribes their particular pieces of land,
right.
You see that. In the New Testament, in the book of Acts, it's very telling that the early church does a very Jewish thing. They come together and they donate their goods to what? To the church, for the church to distribute to those who have need.
And there's no private property in that community, right? I mean, if I'm remembering Acts properly, each person who's part of the ecclesia, the community, the church, gives up their possessions to the community.
Right. Well, there is a sense of private property, as I said, in the sense that maybe what we should say is individual property.
Okay.
But there's no sense that that I can do with my property whatsoever I want to do without regarding what that will do to the church or to the wider society.
And if you were to preach that in American culture, it wouldn't go over too well.
No, because when people hear that, they're thinking of Marxism, they're thinking
Exactly.
of modern expressions of communism from the early 20th century. And what they really are afraid of is totalitarian government.
So we got this kind of idea of corporate responsibility.
Exactly.
Which is biblical,
That's
you
right.
say.
That's right.
And maybe even representative of the Puritans in American history.
That's right.
But
Yeah.
that has been displaced in American culture and society by the capitalist idea.
That's right.
Which tends to focus more on individualism, individual self-sufficiency.
That's right.
And individual freedoms. Is that kind of where you are here with this?
That's right.
Yeah. Well, there's that reminds me of a flag that I've seen pop up in our culture more and more lately. We've got an image of it here, I think. It's called the Gadsden flag. And it's the "Don't Tread on Me" flag with the coiled serpent.
Rattlesnake.
Rattlesnake,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Why have I been seeing that more and more often now? Here we go. Here's our image. A beautiful flag.
Yeah.
Why has that been more and more, or am I mistaken? Maybe I just haven't noticed it. But what's up with the Gadsden flag? What does it mean? What's its history?
Right.
And I think you're interpreting it now as playing a different kind of role in the American symbolism.
That's right.
Yeah.
And again, the Gadsden flag is really an excellent way to look at how capitalism, industrialization has changed American culture, broadly speaking. So in 1775 or 1774, when Gadsden came up with the flag, he was a revolutionary general, and it's this excellent flag to represent the 13 states. The flag is saying, don't tread on the United States.
Right.
But as you've pointed out, Ozzie, in the last, I don't know, 7 or 8 years, we see these bumper stickers with the rattlesnake and the "Don't Tread on Me" logo. But now in the 21st century, it refers to my individual rights. Mm-hmm. Don't trample on my rights to keep and bear arms. Don't trample on my rights to pay my workers whatever I want to pay them.
Right.
Right? And so that's a really wonderful example of how in 200 or so years, a symbol of collectivity, of community, has totally reversed its meaning into a purely individual symbol of individual rights.
Oh, that's fascinating. And I guess it's no mistake that the century between when the Gadsden flag represented corporate solidarity and the 20th century when it became or 21st century when it becomes a more individualized expression of freedom, you have the 19th century, which is when you're suggesting this kind of economic independence has come about to characterize American culture.
That's right. And also, I don't think it's coincidental that the symbols usage in the mid-2000s also coincides with the increasing disparities in wealth and the way that our economy is becoming more divided between those who are extremely wealthy and those who are not. That's not coincidental.
And you see that as an outgrowth of greater capitalistic interests?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
All right. Well, I've got one more image here that's really one of my favorites. It's the image of Jesus, and it's a different image than what we're accustomed to seeing, I think. And I'd like for you to look at it and maybe comment on it. So here we have an image of Jesus complete with halo, but decked out
and an iPad, apparently.
And an iPad, decked out as a corporate businessman. Now, this actually reflects a book that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
No Man Knows My Name. Is that right?
Or actually, Bruce Barton's book, The Man
Nobody Knows. Yes,
The Man Nobody Knows, colon. Let's see. The colon is the history of a history of the real Jesus.
Right. Okay. So,
which was published in 1925,
right.
and it became a national bestseller.
So, who is the real Jesus according to this novel?
Okay. So, Bruce Barton. Let me talk a little bit about him. Bruce Barton was a fairly well-to-do businessman in the 1920s. He was particularly into advertising, and basically, he begins his book by talking about a little boy in Sunday school who hates it. Mm-hmm. And he just squirms and he can't wait for it to be over. And he talks about how the little boy sees these pictures of Jesus with these flabby arms, and he's pale, and he has this red beard. And the little boy doesn't like that image of Jesus, but he does like David, and he likes Samson, and he likes Daniel, because these are how does he put it? These are fighters, and he wonders if David could defeat the heavyweight champion of the world, and he thinks he can. But Jesus he doesn't like, because and he actually says, the little boy says, Jesus is sissified. He's married.
This is the character in the novel. Right?
Yes. Okay. Well, it's him. Yeah. Bruce Barton is telling his experiences in Sunday school.
Okay.
So he grows up and becomes a businessman, and he says that when he becomes a businessman, he begins to thinking, now wait a minute, something is wrong here, because Jesus is this poor country, rural man who picks 12 other rural countrymen, and then with these 12 men creates the greatest organization, that's the term he uses, the greatest organization the world has ever seen, and with those 12 men, he changes the world. And that's what begins him to thinking about, nobody knows the real Jesus.
So he has recast Jesus as the consummate business entrepreneur.
Yes, and advertiser.
Yes. Marketing
yes.
Genius.
Marketing genius, and he says, that one of the geniuses of Jesus was that he was able to get his word out to the people of his day. And he says that Jesus didn't preach in the synagogues, he preached in the marketplace. Mm-hmm. And he said that when he mentioned that to some preachers, they said, well, are you saying that we need to do more street preaching? And he said, no, that's not what I mean. He said that the marketplace of today, in 1925, are magazines and newspapers. And if Jesus were alive today, he would find a way to get his message in every newspaper and in every magazine.
So would Barton say if Jesus were alive today in the 21st century, he'd be on social media?
No doubt. He would say that Jesus would be the Lord of Twitter. He would be the Lord of Facebook, that he would be posting and he would have Facebook pages to get his message out.
Okay. So this kind of represents the kind of ultimate recasting of Christianity in a capitalist framework.
Yeah.
And that's really what you're talking about.
That's
here.
right.
So if you were to go out on social media or in magazines and start writing about this and talking about this, these would be foreign ideas for most American Christians, I would think. If you were to suggest that Christianity has been co-opted by capitalism and now that the kind of fundamentals of it are vastly different from biblical Christianity.
Yeah, and that's been my experience because I have given presentations and I have talked about this to Christian groups, and there is a shock, right? They find it shocking.
Yeah.
And it's hard, but because capitalism is the air we breathe. We're like fish swimming in water. So it's becomes this capitalistic way of being has influenced the way we read the Bible. So Barton, for instance, begins his book with a quote from Scripture where Jesus says, "Do you not know that I must be about my Father's business?" And he takes that rather literally.
Yeah. Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, so this is really kind of fascinating stuff here. We've witnessing in the last couple hundred years, according to your work, a transformation of the fundamental character of Christianity, which once was based on kind of corporate idealism, now being recast according to a capitalistic framework. Interesting to see where this takes us in the future. And this is what you define as the process of secularization.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ralph, this has been a pleasure. I've
My
enjoyed
pleasure.
having you today, and hopefully we'll be back in the future sometime.
I would be most happy to.
Great.
Thank you, Ozzie.
so much.
Appreciate it.
Well, that's our program for this week. Until now, I'm Ozzie Ostwalt. Thank you and goodbye. That's good.
Great.
That's
Ozzie, thank you.
Very
Yeah.
interesting.